I talked to who broke the WPATH files? Schellenberger. I talked to him about this when he broke the WPATH files, and he had said he had watched my conversation with Abigail Shire when I was ill for a while, and when I came back and hit my podcast to get hard, the first podcast I did was with Abigail Shire, who wrote Irreversible Damage. And I was very nervous about doing the podcast because at that point it was, your reputation was on the line if you objected to the transgender surgery crowd. And so we walked through her book, and I looked into the surgical procedures, which are like, they're brutal and experimental beyond belief. And that's what I wanted to point out is, Schellenberger talked to me about that because he watched that podcast. And, and Schellenberger's a pretty brave journalist. And his basic response was something like, this is so awful, it must be exaggerated. There's no way it can be happening. And it took him basically 2 years to wrap his head around the fact that, no, this was happening, that the major medical establishment, American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, were not only on board with this, but promoting it and persecuting people who objected to it. And it's really something. It's really something that's actually, as you also alluded to, it's really incomprehensible. It's so terrible. It's no wonder people don't believe it, right? It's no wonder that people are turning a blind eye to it because it's very. But it also makes me think, that must have been what was happening in Nazi Germany when rumors of the persecution of the Jews and their demolition and all the other people the Nazis went after started to circulate, and people weren't nearly as connected then as they are now. It was going to be much more easy for them to turn a blind eye to things they couldn't possibly believe were happening. Well, we're in that situation now. It's so sickening. I just can't believe that it's happening. And I can't believe that it's happening while people are proclaiming that that's the moral pathway. It's like, what the hell? Okay, so fine. You saw something was happening in 2015. You had a good career in Hollywood. You decided that you're going to move to Tennessee, to Nashville, which Nashville, 2 thumbs up for Nashville. It's a great place. And you've done that. And then, okay, so let's get the timeline going here. And so you started was the activism, the more conservative level public activism, did that initiate on your part with the transgender issue and then move from there?
Well, I had been outspoken about education and mandates and things like that around COVID, but it's one of those central issues where actually I was going to say this, people should know, you and I didn't plan to talk about the transgender issue, honestly, but it's actually important because I have noticed this issue more than any other issue. That issue has been what has activated more people, especially in spheres of influence that have never involved themselves for very practical, business-oriented reasons, into this sphere and to say, I am going to fight and put it all on the line because this is a line that means so many other things. What they've done to children tells you everything about what they're willing to do in every other sense. That's a truth that I'd say the most intelligent people I know have all figured out. This line means 1,000 other things, and they're all supremely evil. And that's why you're seeing so many prominent people that you would have never expected stand up, speak up, put their money and their time into the fight, like Elon Musk. If you had told me years ago, Elon Musk is going to come out and support your movie and promote it, and it's going to end up getting almost 60 million views, largely as a byproduct of him and Donald Trump Jr. promoting it, I would have said you're crazy because I'm very practical and pragmatic, and I recognize as somebody who owns all these incredible businesses, even if he does agree with me, that's a very dangerous position for him to take with the government contracts and things like that he has to deal with. So you have to ask yourself, why would somebody like that be willing to risk everything that they've achieved? And it's very simple. This line marks an evil that will beset not just our nation, but the world for the next generation and the generation after it. And you're going to have to get to the darkest of places for a small group of people to rise up and do whatever's necessary to bring back some semblance of sanity and liberty. I don't want us to get there. And that's the thing, is some people would say like, oh, well, you're a fascist, you're a radical, or whatever it may be. What I think is actually fascist is what's going on now, where you've got these people in these institutions who believe it is fundamentally their right to shove their ideology down everybody else's throat. That's what's happening in corporate America. That's what's happening in education. It's happening all over the place. That's what I find fundamentally to be wrong, but it has a cascading effect that will continue on and will destroy the lives of our kids and grandkids. And so I think it's important people recognize that about that transgender issue when it comes to kids. It is something that means so many other things.
Well, we can elaborate on that briefly. I mean, in 2016, when I released a couple of videos that caused a major kerfuffle that really hasn't died down around me since. And the videos were essentially objecting to the government of Justin Trudeau deciding that it was okay to put words in people's mouths, including mine, with regards to the transgender issue. And I felt two things at that point. I thought, okay, well, you've jumped out of your bailiwick there, buddy, because you don't get to. There was never legislation in any Western country ever that compelled speech among private citizens, ever. So there were certain types of commercial speech that were regulated, but for commercial reasons. And then I thought too, well, now we have this idea that we can mess with the fundamental category of sex and make that a social construction. And I thought, well, that's the most fundamental perceptual category, I think, sex. It's more fundamental than black and white, up and down, night and day, like male and female. If you don't get that right, you don't reproduce. And so that disappeared 650 million years ago. Like the sexual differentiation is hardwired at the most fundamental level. And what that means is that if you... I warned the Canadian Senate about this in 2016. I said, if you start to confuse young people about sex, you will produce an epidemic among young women, like a contagious epidemic. Because I knew the literature on contagious psychological epidemics. It goes back 300 years, and it's always young women. It's likely because they hit puberty earlier than young men, and so have to contend with the brute force of biological transformation when they're still relatively immature, comparatively speaking. And so for whatever reason, they're more susceptible to psychological epidemics. And so, you have two things going on. You enforce the lie that men can be women, and so you prime people for the lie, and then you confuse the most vulnerable people and tilt them into like an irrecoverable pathology. And then it got even worse, because I didn't think at that time that we would have an epidemic of surgery. Like, I have an imagination for evil, but I got to say it didn't extend that far.
Because it seems absurd.
Well, it is. It's the ultimate in evil clown.
Yep.
Like, it's the worst thing that you can imagine. It's got this horrible element of satirical the blackest of satirical comedy, and you can see that in the transgender movement on the political side, in all sorts of other ways, because and so it's got that dark edge to it. And, when that was a fringe thing for theaters, well, it wasn't disrupting all of the world. But when it moves to the center, whenever the fringe moves to the center, all hell breaks loose.